and bring in our reporter Govan Whittles, who attended that briefing. Good evening to you, Govan. So you were there, you heard all the ministers speaking, and we just heard Lungile say, why did it have to come to a crisis to see a coordinated response? We've heard a number of details from the plan, but from your perspective, what would you say were the most critical issues and the most important aspects to come out of this briefing?
Well, what was very interesting is how dedicated the government will be to cutting red tape, as they say. The amount of regulations or the amount of deviations they're willing to pursue in order to achieve the securing of additional capacity clearly indicates that they're going to put aside their priorities, as some have said, to build the black industrialist base and try to plug the shortfall of electricity generation capacity in South Africa as soon as possible. But it's just not clear how long that will take, and even though there are commitments to get some of these regulations cut and additional capacity procured within 3 months at maximum, realistically they'd need up to 36 months before all of these interventions start paying off. That's the real end ticket, where you could say load shedding would no longer be a factor, even if Eskom experiences the kind of breakdowns which have led to stage 6 load shedding in the past. They're assuming with cutting this red tape and buying this extra power, even if that happens, they'll be able to buy power and essentially supply the grid without implementing load shedding. But let's take a look at what the Trade and Industry Minister Ibrahim Patel had to say about the deviations in terms of the localization requirements. In simple terms, this means that if an IPP bidder wants to set up a solar farm, they would have to make sure that all of the, in this case, PV modules, which is the cells that translate the sun's energy into electricity, are made locally. And this is one of the requirements in that bid window. Minister Patel today is saying that they're foregoing that requirement because they realize there are only 2 companies in the country that make these modules, and they want to get these solar farms up and running as soon as possible so they can buy this electricity. Let's have a look at what Ibrahim Patel had to say.
We've taken the view in government, set out by the President in the address to the nation, that the priority is to get as much electricity, as much energy into the grid as rapidly as possible. That's fundamental. It's important for the economy, it's important for growth, it's important for industrialization and even our localization ambition across the economy. It's important for ordinary South Africans. And so therefore we've taken the conclusion to that view that the localization targets for component manufacturing, in this case the PV solar module, should not retard the speed with which the independent power producers and Eskom can get energy onto the grid.
I would say that's quite a compromise for the minister there, because it's his big passion project, localization, and he wants to see much more local industries, big manufacturing. So he's had to acknowledge that it's simply not possible in this particular, so a big compromise there, I would say. So in terms of this selling excess power back to the grid, that could generate up to 1,000 megawatts. But we need a lot more than that. So we might see some power coming back in the next 3 months, if that goes according to plan. But you just said 36 months. Now, we have been told 24 months. And when I interviewed Pravin Gordhan on the weekend, he said, yep, we'll be ending load shedding, we'll be through this crisis in 24 months. You're saying 36 now? Why is that?
Pravin Gordhan said so this afternoon, saying that they expect the full implementation of what they call package number 3 for the recovery from the energy insecurity to be completed within 36 months. First part of the package is obviously bringing on board the IPPs with the additional capacity of up to 1,000 megawatts. If that Section 24 determination is signed off by the minister, they'll be able to raise that up to 1,600 megawatts. Then the big maintenance begins at what they've described as the top 6 power stations in the country that have been earmarked for intensive maintenance, while at the same time they'll have to roll out intensive security as they recognize that fraud and corruption is still happening there. And then afterwards, once they've got Eskom to a position where it's generating the expected number of megawatts, they'll purchase additional megawatts from renewables, and that entire package put together would mean at the end of 36 months that even if there's a 6,000 megawatt breakdown at Eskom's power stations, these top 6 power stations would be able to step in, fill that void, or they would be able to buy the additional power required from the IPPs. It'll take the IPPs 36 months to complete the construction of the new projects and start bringing that electricity onto the grid. Also important to point out here, the president made quite a big fuss about buying power, additional surplus power from mines, companies that are able to generate that. Interestingly, the Minister of Mineral Resources says that only Goldfields so far is able to generate a lot of power, and they're hoping to buy surplus power from Goldfields in the future, but the mines at this point are not in a position to contribute significantly to the shortage that's experienced on our power grid. And in comes Car Powership,
yes.
which is able to provide quite a lot of power.
So let's just get that whole story of the car power ships. These are these ships that come in, they use LNG gas, and basically it's like having a massive generator off the coast, and they can give you power immediately. The problem is it was a 20-year contract we were signing, and these are only ever seen as short-term measures, and we would be at the whim of the market and the price of LNG. There was a big environmental assessment being made, things were put on hold. Did you get an update today on where we are with car power ships? Are they on the table or off the table?
Not Car Powership specifically, of course, that's a Turkish producer, but the issue of power ships was addressed directly by Gwede Mantashe, and he's saying that Car Powership still needs to secure that environmental authorization before any deal could go ahead. But he's pretty clear that power ships are not off the table for South Africa. They're able to generate and provide into the grid a substantial amount of base load power, and even as some of the critics are saying, they should rather convert the old power stations into gas and buy the gas out of Mozambique and have that permanent infrastructure in South Africa so that you're not at the whim of the LNG price and the ability to plug in and plug out of the grid. It does look like the Energy Department will pursue this if it makes sense financially. That's a big if, and we'll listen to Gwede Mantashe in a moment, but should also be important, or it is important to point out that today we got a clear answer from the Finance Minister regarding Eskom's debt, saying the government has agreed to take on a portion of that debt and that his department will be making proposals in September as to what would be a sustainable debt level, and then have details in the October medium-term budget policy statement around that, and that seems to have gotten some positive responses from the investors. But Gwede Mantashe is saying between now and then they still need to find this additional power, and power ships are not off the menu. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
I want to start by answering the question on power ships. I did a lot of consultation trying to get a legal advice on this matter. And the answer is, anything that is not forbidden is allowed. If it's not forbidden, it is allowed. So, sourcing energy from power ships is not forbidden. If there are technicalities that they must sort out on environmental assessment and many others, they should not comply with that. But there is no power ships that are forbidden from doing business in South Africa.
All right, so really we've got more detail. What's the very next thing that's going to happen now?
The Energy Crisis Committee is taking charge of this. It's run by the Director General in the Presidency's office, Pindile Baleni. So they'll meet regularly to check how far the IPPs are in construction of new projects, how much they've been able to bring onto the grid. But of course, the deadlines have been set by the DPE Minister. He says within a month we should have access to about 1,000 megawatts of power from IPPs, and within 3 months about 150 megawatts more from gas supplies. And there are a number of other targets that they've set that they're hoping to reach. And it's a stage towards the 3 years when they think by then they'll have at least 6,000 to 7,000 additional capacity elsewhere, that even if Eskom's power stations break down, we won't be seeing rolling power cuts in the country.
So 2 years, not 3, we've got to hold tight. Thank you very much.